Hello.
Good afternoon, Teodora. I feel like
Good afternoon, Jack.
we should start like I think we gotta get an intro going.
We what?
I think we should get an intro going. We should try to figure that out.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah.
Do you want to do the voice for me?
Yeah, I'll do the voice for you.
Okay.
I'll become known as the infamous.
So for those of you who don't know, over the summer I made a show open for us.
It was a really, really good show opening.
Thank you.
Will say.
Thank you very much. I tried really hard, used my production skills.
I had a lot of input.
Yeah, a lot of. He said, "This is great."
Most of my input, though, I feel is important and relevant because
I like when people critique me, and you said all nice things.
Yeah,
so
that's why. Because I understood I couldn't even do this if I had double the time. So this is perfect.
Yeah, I did it in a day. So it was great, and it looked good, sounded good, no copyright issues, and then WICR became WIUR, and
Never has there been a better time to change names than right then and there, right when we had completed our work.
You know, so now Jack's like, we should get a new one, and I'm like, yeah, we should.
Oh well, there'll be a time.
Well, yeah. We'll get one eventually. So.
Eventually. Yeah. Alrighty. So, would you like me to do the intro this week?
Sure.
Or since I did last week, you can do this week.
You
and
did
then
last week?
Yeah, I thought I did for Idiocracy. Like I presented.
Oh,
a nice
okay. Well,
intro.
yeah.
Do you want to present this?
Yeah, I could do it.
Because this was really planned out.
This was what?
This was incredibly hyper planned out to this exact millisecond.
No, it really was. We have a whole rundown for the show. We're already behind on a few minutes because we're having this conversation about show opens.
Good point.
I'm kidding. But yeah, so the topic for this week is going to be bodily autonomy. And essentially we're going over everything that has to do with that. So particularly very important historic events that have been happening this past year with the Dobbs decision and the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. And
vaccine mandates,
yeah,
seatbelt rules, helmet laws. We're gonna go big for this episode. We're gonna catch a wide.
Yeah, so naturally we should start with the most important of them all, which is
rules.
Helmets. Just kidding. Okay, we're gonna start with abortion.
Everyone's favorite topic at the dinner table.
What'd you say? I didn't hear.
Everybody's favorite topic at the dinner table.
Yeah. At all types of tables. So essentially last fall, if you're watching our previous radio show, well, not last fall, last spring, if you're watching our previous radio show, Jack and I spoke about the leak in the Supreme Court. The majority opinion was leaked.
And they're really getting down to finding out who did it. That investigation is being run so well.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
I told you. What did I say? I said it's gonna be run poorly. It's just a cover up. What are you gonna do?
Yeah. It's kind of sad. I really want to know who leaked it. First of all, that's just my own thing. I want to know who did that, who was responsible for that. But I don't think that's gonna come out anytime at all. But essentially, with that, over the summer, the actual decision was released. I will say I remember exactly where I was when the decision was released. I was interning. I'm not going to say where I was interning for because I don't want to affiliate myself with anyone.
Not that you've, yeah.
But I was in a newsroom, and when we got the news, I got the entire opinion, the dissent. I got everything. And that
dissent was out really quick.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably one of the few dissents that was usually they'll release. I shouldn't say usually. A lot of the time I've looked, and I check OYAs pretty regularly on certain cases. You can kind of see when a dissent, everything will be out on OYAs within a few days or a few weeks. That was on within 15 minutes.
You want to know what's interesting? When you work for a news company, they send you have access to everything.
Yeah.
So we got the full thing sent to us, and there was a solid, a very specific amount of time where all of our communication was literally silenced because everyone was reading this. No, everyone legitimately stopped in their tracks what they were doing, and it completely changed. So it was For me, it was just a really weird experience just because I feel like, especially over the summer, it was like constant, like my phone would constantly be going off, my computer would be constantly going off. There was always some type of notification. Someone's always trying to reaching out to people.
That was the
Someone's
one time
talking.
there was nothing.
That was the one time it was literally silent for a good 30 minutes. Unheard of. And it was just silent because it was so huge. And then you read it and you were like, I don't know. Personally, I was like, this was crazy. I was convinced almost when we got the leak that the opinion was changed and that it was someone on the other side that was trying to um just like release an opinion of what it should have been. That was what I was hoping that it was, but that's not what it ended up being. The opinion that was released was more or less the opinion that came out. And quite sad. So yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, today we're going to be starting off. And I mean, we both disagree with the decision that the Supreme Court held. I think we have a similar belief in why, but I think we also have differing views where I do like the Supreme Court in a lot of ways, partially because last year while Teodora was doing a lot of research on news, I also did a lot of research on for especially senior capstone stuff on the rise of, authoritarian governments. And when you largely look at them, a place where authoritarian governments kind of get quelled um, is usually in the court system. And that's where you see a lot of it, especially if it's, you see this a lot. Right now it's happening in India,
Mhm.
right? Where I believe it's Prime Minister Modi who is currently going through these issues of trying to create a more streamlined and possibly authoritarian government, which is not unlikely. There's been a lot of issues with that in other, neighboring areas that he's kind of getting stopped by his court. But yet again, that runs into this issue of how it's set up, how it's structured. The United States has a strange structure to it. But along with that, you have this court system that's technically supposed to be built upon previous legal principles. This is not the first time we've reversed a decision. I mean, it's happened in other things before, but this is a pretty groundbreaking thing.
Yeah.
And I just kind of wanted to talk about it as well. Bodily autonomy doesn't just start with what you're able to put into your body and also how it operates. It's how it's viewed, because in my opinion bodily autonomy starts within privacy. And I think a
Mhm.
big area of privacy is never explicitly stated in the United States Constitution. A lot of people can argue right now that you do not possess any privacy. I mean, the Patriot Act is a very good example,
True.
a
Yeah.
legally relevant example, that the United States government does not feel that you have any inherent right to privacy. Now, I'd argue the Griswold v. Connecticut decision, right, which is it's one of my favorite court cases in the Supreme Court, because I think it's a really strange case where you have these people in Connecticut up in Yale, or up by Yale, I should say, that are looking to get contraceptives. And the state of Connecticut had outlawed them at the time, even for married couples. And you had this married couple come out and they're trying to get contraceptives prescribed to them in some essence, right? And the state of Connecticut said you couldn't do that, and they shut down this health clinic, and the health clinic sued, and the people sued who were trying to get these prescriptions. And it runs into this question, and this would later on become some of the basis for future cases. I think it played some role in Roe, which has now been overturned, but this is pre-Roe. This is,
Yeah.
I believe it's 65 this happens. Roe happens in 73.
73.
So you have this big principled case, which is kind of in some ways at risk now that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe, of whether some small legal precedent of privacy to the fact that the government cannot limit what you do in your own home. And I think that's where bodily autonomy starts, because if you don't have that privacy element, if you don't have a view that what the government can say or judge you on in some legal scope begins and ends somewhere, then you don't have bodily autonomy, right? There is an element of privacy which you can possess on your own, which, it comes into the fact that it doesn't just begin and end with vaccines or women's right to choose, or I should say a person's right to choose, right? Or seatbelts for that matter. It begins and ends when you have a defining zone, whether it's a 6x6 box that you say you have no business to be in here without a warrant, that some amount of which incurs probable cause, it means you have no business to be here too, right? So I think that's where I view it. That's the basis. And I kind of just want to say that. I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
establish a
Yeah, I was gonna
basis.
say, I think that a person has a right to their own body, and I think the government doesn't have a right to tell someone what to do with their body in certain instances, and then I feel like there are limits to that, and personally, I see that the limit, to that is when whatever you're doing can affect yourself or someone else in a way that can cause death or cause severe harm. And so what I mean by that, right? So a lot of people are using that argument, that technically, abortions are killing people. It's killing if we're considering a fetus a person, then that's what it is. Well, I don't know. I think it's a very sensitive area. I don't see that the government has any right to tell a person that they don't have the right to terminate a pregnancy, especially because most people that are having abortions, and this is Pew Research, most people that are having abortions, are people that are mothers and have already had children before. Most cases, it's because of um, money reasons. They don't have the ability to pay for another child, which is why um, most women are seeking abortions. So it's not really coming down to that. And I think that it's the argument of we should just have people continue to have children, even if they don't want to. I think there's a problem with that, right? We should be looking into other ways. If also to the people that are like arguing why abortion should be illegal, it's technically still legal, so I don't want to kind of say that it
Legal, yeah,
is.
legal is a very
It's
difficult term.
legal in it's state based now, so now the states have the right to kind of choose their own policy. So certain states completely got rid of it, other states, um, it's like it wasn't
Yeah,
overturned.
and to be fair, it
But
was never either federally legal or illegal. It was just recognized by the court
it was just
as this
it was
kind of
federally
principle.
protected. It was
Yeah,
federally protected.
yeah.
But however, you had states like Kentucky, for example, that only had like one running abortion clinic in the
Ohio
whole
as well, yeah.
state, and most people and that clinic was not able to even run most of the time because there were people outside of it protesting year round and essentially harassing people that were just going in, even if they were just going in for regular checkups, not necessarily going in for abortions or going in for anything. Um, to that even extent, just people going, it doesn't even have to be an abortion clinic, it could have just been Planned Parenthood,
Yeah.
right? So it, so you had all that stuff going on too. So there was never really a clear cut that it was legal. And that I will say that like is the one thing that I will criticize the current presidential administration for. We had this leak for how long and a plan was not ready.
That's government, baby.
And
Come
the
on
plan was
now. What
not
else is
ready.
new?
It was like as soon as the decision came out, the final decision came out, it was like, "Well, what do we do now?" And no one had
There
any
was
plan.
no
People all
response.
they had were opinions. All these politicians were just sending out, "Well, this is my opinion on this." And then you had y I don't know, Twitter was really funny. It was not I don't know. I feel like it was a big disservice because we had the worst case scenario
Yeah.
already presented to us months before and nothing really happened. So what I will say, but again, to the flip side, I think when it comes to something like vaccines or when it comes to seatbelts or when it comes to helmets, I think that's something where, particularly with vaccines, I think a mandate isn't a problem. We've had mandates for multiple vaccines, and I think the only reason why now it's this huge problem is because COVID-19 has become like this politicized, partisan issue when really it should have never been a partisan issue. The issue that it came from was literally people just be well, I personally don't want to stop. I don't want to stay home and I don't want to stop my life and I don't want to get a vaccine.
You got to be
Yet,
reasonable now that there's a certain amount of people that when they spoke about not wanting to stay at home, when they spoke about not wanting to stay, it's because they couldn't do their jobs remote,
okay,
right? There's an element of that too where we have to take into account that there were some people who worked in the service industry that when they sat at home, they were losing money, right? That they maybe they couldn't go on unemployment for whatever reasons, where they worked off the books and that's why they couldn't, right?
Mhm.
Or you had other people. So to say that most people, because there's a lot of people who would have said, yeah, I'll get vaccinated as soon as I can to go back to work faster. And there was other things that came into account where it was like, listen, I need to go back to work. No one's helping me here too. So let's keep that in mind
No,
as well.
I understand that part, but I think that a majority of people that are against the vaccines, their reason for being against the vaccine, from what I've seen, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, has just been people just being like, "Well, I have the right to my own body."
I think at the same point that you do, part of that comes into right is reasonableness, right? You kind of outlined it a little bit. What is reasonable? And I think that's where you and I differ on this issue is
Yeah.
what is reasonable. And I would say a grown adult has a right to make decisions, whether good or bad, or the worsening or betterment of their health, right? And for us to say that you should be forced to take a vaccine, I think is a big statement, right? I think it's a big statement because you said there are vaccine mandates, but vaccine mandates are not an overall broad spectrum thing, right? Vaccine mandates come into play, and Massachusetts was the first to do it with
Uh-huh.
smallpox, I believe, right?
Yes, you're correct.
They come into play when it comes to public education, right? Where they requested not adults, right? Unless you're a school teacher, right? Which comes into jobs you in most instances, especially a job like that encourages education, you have a right to choose not to do that job.
Mhm.
So in my eyes, it's less of a requirement to put someone who is going into instances like this, who might be a teacher, right, who's going to be working with kids regularly, to put that requirement on them. But yet again, it was placed on children, and that's where I think that there is a big and important point where there's a difference between having a grown adult be mandated to do something and having a child do something, right? Because if a child is going into a public education system, they're putting other kids at risk. And that's where I think you and I are going to differ a lot, is because I think you're about to come back with saying grown
Yeah.
adults should be mandated to
No,
do these
what I
things.
was gonna say was the difference between smallpox and COVID-19 is that when it came down to COVID-19, yes, anybody could get it, but it was adults. It was the adult population
Adult population
that
was
was seeing
greater
more great
affected
yeah,
greater
that was
amounts, yeah.
more affected than the children were.
But
Right here,
now
I'm seeing it was what, hold on. Over 80% of those infected children died from smallpox. So that was the point that like wanted to make because I saw the stat. I just didn't have it off the top of my head. But what my point was, yes, so it makes sense that it was going to start with yes, let's have children when it came down to smallpox. Yes, let's have children get vaccinated first, and let's put it first into the school system. You have to have certain vaccine mandates in order to go into certain grade levels. Yes, it makes sense because at that time it was that smallpox was was impacting everyone, but 80% of children who had it died.
Well, along with that too, right, is we're not just talking about there's a very big difference between a child and a grown adult.
Yeah.
Legally speaking, even in the 1800s
Yeah,
in
sure.
Massachusetts, there is a very big difference.
Mhm.
The 18 barrier, although it's become a lot more difficult now for a person who's 18 to be declared a capable and independent adult. They can't even rent a car or drink alcohol. So it's not exactly the
Or
most,
stay in a hotel room.
or stay in a hotel room. It's not exactly the most overarching, all encompassing. 18 is the age that
Yeah.
congratulations, now you are independent. But I think the problem now comes in, you have a child, right? Yes, they're
Mhm.
being greatly affected by the smallpox thing, but do they possess some amount or amount of time or mental capacity to make informed and well-educated decisions on their own? And even in the 1800s and even today, I don't believe that they do,
So
right?
you're saying so it's
So
okay for the government to impose a mandate on children, but
who
not a
are with
mandate
no, no,
on
no, not
older.
mandated on children. Children who are being put into public schools. Public schools are an independent entity which can mandate requirements on them, just like a job can.
So then
But I think if you're saying if you want to come out into the general population, you have to have a vaccine, I think it's a bit too much. It's a bit of an overstep, right?
but then I don't know. I'm really big on consistency. So
I think this
if
is pretty
you're yeah,
consistent.
but my only issue with that is if you're saying that it's not okay for the government to tell anyone what to do, how is it then okay just because a child is going into public school? Listen, If you're going to private schools, most private schools, you have to pay for it. So now it becomes
You
a
already
class
have to
thing.
pay for public school though, too. I mean, we can't say that public school is free because there are a lot of people, even those who might not own or possess, are still paying for public school. Public school is not free.
Okay, in what sense?
All right, you have to pay taxes first
Okay,
of all.
yes, but you're gonna have to pay taxes
You're
regardless.
gonna
But
pay
when you're
taxes regardless,
paying,
but you also have to pay your property taxes, which a large portion goes to your school district, right?
sure,
Let's
but you
say,
can also do that with private schools. So what's the only
but you
difference
still
between
have to
private
pay
and
your
public?
property taxes.
Sure,
Your
but
property
what's
taxes aren't going to go to your private school; they're going to go to your public school still.
sure, but now the difference is when you're going to a public school, all of that you're already gonna have to pay. When you're going to private school, you're paying additional fees. So now it becomes a class thing.
It's always a class thing.
It always is a class thing,
So then
yeah.
let's not have any mandates.
No, I don't think. I will say this, when it comes down to vaccines, it's not like, not only are you putting, let's get children out of the conversation. If you're
The kids
looking
are
at,
great. They're the
kids are
future.
amazing. I love
They're the
children.
future.
I agree. Absolutely agree. However, and they need good educations. So they need to be in schools, and some of them will go to public schools. But my only thing is that you're making a decision to not, someone who's 18 years old is making a decision not to get vaccinated. And I think there's a difference. Also, I just need to put out there's a difference between people who cannot get vaccinated and those who choose not to get vaccinated. Because there are people that can't get vaccinated, and that's a different story. That you shouldn't be forced to get vaccinated if you're taking medication that's gonna somehow not work with the vaccine, or if you're experiencing some type of medical issue that's also not like working with the vaccines. In those instances, then I think it's perfectly fine.
What about religious reasons? Are you going to include religious reasons? Because there is something to be said when the Pope comes out and says that you should not be taking any medications that were developed with fetal embryos. And one of the vaccines, the simplest of the vaccine that incurs one dose, granted, it wasn't exactly appropriate for people to take anymore because of health issues, right? It caused heart issues. Is that a valid reason? If that's the only vaccine, if all we have is the, what was it, Johnson & Johnson vaccine? If the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is our only option and it's developed with fetal embryos, and I, as a Catholic, have decided I don't want to ingest that or have that placed in my body because I feel it violates a basis of my fundamental rights and my religious leaning, does that trump what the government is requiring me to do now?
That's a really good question, and I think the answer to that will be, we will see that when that time is
But
actually
let's
here.
say, but if
But I will say,
if there's a vaccine mandate
what
on the
ifs,
people,
but in actual reality, there's Pfizer and there's Moderna.
But no, but this is still irrelevant because it's still a relevant issue.
It's
because
sure it is. However, there
COVID
are
3.0
different
or 6.0, whichever 0.0 we're on now, comes out and someone says, "Listen, we jumped the gun on Johnson & Johnson. Okay, we, the government, are mandating that you get vaccinated. Johnson & Johnson is the only option because Pfizer and Moderna are no good anymore. They're not going to effectively treat this COVID. I'm sorry, it's created with fetal embryos. You have to get it."
Okay.
Is that a reasonable thing to
But this
mandate
is my
people
thing.
get?
I feel like arguing about something that doesn't happen, that isn't happening, I feel like that we're just not gonna get
But
anywhere.
it's a relevant issue because
I'm sure it is, but there are other options.
But here's the thing. My question is this, right? If there is a mandate, and your point is that the mandate is because we need to look out for the betterment,
Mhm.
the overall good, at what point does your personal freedom to believe in a religious cause or a religious institution or a basis, right? A moral, what you view as a moral basis, at what point does that stop and the common good begin? Because from there we can start to have a discussion, right? Should a person be forced by the government demanding an overall good? Should they be forced to have this vaccine if it violates, in their eyes or their religious institution's eyes, the religious principles?
I think I'll answer that question when it's happening in reality, because I can't speak to a hypothetical. But that's me, like,
all of this is hypothetical.
Actually,
too, right?
well, not really, because this is happening. What's not hypothetical?
Well,
Women not getting the right to have an abortion in
12
Mississippi.
out of 50 states.
Yeah. What?
But
A
to the
10-year-old,
same-
10-year-old being raped and then having to travel to another country, another state to seek an abortion. That happened this summer.
Or what
Real
about
things
people,
that are
or what
happening.
about people who have decided not to get vaccinated because they feel that they don't possess enough information on how the efficacy of the vaccines.
But how many of those people are actually looking?
What do you mean? How many of those people are actually
How
at the
are they
efficacy?
looking?
They might be looking to see what the overall statistics are, what's getting affected. There's plenty of people who are finding heart issues and other effects of it. Don't get me wrong, I'm vaccinated too, but there are some people who are looking at it and saying, I've had COVID before. There are other options out here if I get COVID. I don't need to get vaccinated automatically. And
Yeah.
now they're getting put in positions where they can't go into government buildings. They can't go into places of potentially worship if the state puts a limit on that, right? They can't go into jobs. They're being denied jobs and their ability to provide for their families because they didn't go get a vaccine. Even right now, if I have been living in a cave for the last 3 years, right? I know you don't want hypotheticals here, but hypothetically I could be living in a cave. I come out of it. I haven't had COVID, but we have all of these abilities to treat COVID, right? Not just vaccines anymore. There's pills that you can take. There's all of these, what I forget what they're called. They'll hook you up to, I think it's an IV or it's a pill, and it basically acts as giving you antibodies or antidotes or whatever it is. I forget what it's called. I know Joe Rogan did it.
It's literally in my head right now.
It's a contested topic, but doctors and scientists have said that it's more effective at treating the illness because it's treating it on response and not just sitting in your body dormant necessarily, right? If I come out and I say, hey, I have these other options. Why do I have all these limiting agents on me, right? Because they are limiters. They're saying what you can and cannot do.
So since you love hypotheticals, let me ask you one. So if there is no option besides a vaccine,
like Johnson & Johnson, right?
If
like
there
I did, that's the
is
same
no
thing.
option. But that's what I'm saying. We can't speak on these hypotheticals because it's not happening. We have to give the full picture and talk about what's actually going on right
Exactly.
now.
Let's give
and
the
the full
picture.
picture is there are 3 vaccines available. You might not like one of them,
And
but
there's
there's
also
other
other treatment methods that you can take.
Yeah, there are other treatment methods. However, there are 3 vaccines that are available. This is something that physically halted our entire society.
So it's Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and then did they ever approve that other one?
Moderna by the FDA. I'm
Pfizer, Moderna, and then there was another one because
there was the other one.
That was the European one.
The European one.
Yeah.
I don't believe it was approved in the US yet.
Okay.
But I do know certain people that have that vaccine.
Okay.
So
do they like it? Do they think it's good? I heard Sputnik was great.
And all I heard was that their vaccine status does not count in the US.
That's a bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
So much for across the board laws here.
Well, that's when you get into international law, and I think it's
a bit
slippier. If we thought US laws were a bit,
they're really what is a real international law? There's no real thing.
Hey, come on, the UN is trying really, really hard.
Yeah, they're really out there.
The World Health Organization
blocking traffic in Manhattan.
Speaking of traffic, what are your thoughts on the seatbelt?
Okay, this is a serious issue that I think needs. I thoroughly believe this, right? Seatbelts. They're an issue that's been out for how many years, right? We've only had, and this is where I think it's relevant to discuss this, right? Okay. You have the data, right? You get into a car accident, cars have not only become safer and more fuel efficient, but we've come to the realization that when you put a seatbelt on and you get into a car accident, you are more likely to survive that car accident because you had a seatbelt on, right?
Now use your same argument with COVID, please.
Well, no, because this is relevant because it's had more time for us to be provided data.
So you're saying that a mandate on COVID-19
would
be allowed once we have data?
Because here comes the point, right? It is still unreasonable for a government to require that I myself, just in my car, right, me solely saying I'm not going to wear a seatbelt. I have the data to make an informed decision. If I choose to make the bad decision, right, I should have to live with those consequences of going through my front windshield at however fast I'm going when I've gotten into this situation, because I knew with the information I was provided, hey, listen, this seatbelt is going to make sure that I don't go through the window. It's going to make sure that I don't get injured in this car wreck, and it's going to provide that safety. I, as a 22-year-old person, with the understanding and knowledge and education, as a 21 in a few days, right, individual who has been provided this information, who's been told by experts and society and can review this data pretty reasonably, I have made an incorrect decision, but I should have to live with the consequences of that decision.
That was the longest sentence you've ever said.
It's a
I just have
reasonable-
to say, so I don't like that argument, because now what does that then mean? That our entire government should then not have any type of consequences at all for anything? So now me as
What
a
do you mean
21,
not any
so no,
consequences at
using
all?
your argument as a 21-year-old woman right now, right? Let's say I want to go out for and consume. Are we allowed to talk about drinking?
No, I don't think we
No.
are.
Okay,
No.
anyways, but
James is
let's
giving us a no
say
nod.
okay,
Yeah.
so but let's just say in that instance, and I decide to drive a vehicle, but I know the data. I know that is the government not allowed to do
That's
that?
where I
So
think it
now
runs
where are
into a
we
different
drawing the
right,
line?
because if I get into a car accident and the car accident is not my fault, right? Even if it is, right? Me not wearing my seatbelt is not affecting anyone within my vehicle or the other vehicle. But me getting into an inebriated state where I'm not legally can negatively affect other people because I am not within the right mental fortitude to make good and proper decisions.
Okay, so then now using that argument, me not getting a COVID vaccine and then giving someone else.
COVID vaccine, right? I do not have the same amount of data on whether a COVID vaccine is going to help me or hurt me as I do.
You don't have the same amount, but there is data that shows that it is
And there's
helping
also
people.
data that's going to show that it's not. And the only thing that's going to show over time that this is the best decision for me, or other possible options are better equipped at handling this, right? Because human beings are not copy and paste. You cannot treat every human being as if they're the same. That's the issue that we've run into with the ideas of weight loss and health management. That's the issues that we've run into with other cardiovascular issues, right? There is no cut and dry system to just treat everyone. There is no broad spectrum plan. Health sciences has largely agreed that people are not, even when it comes to mental issues, right? That's the problem that some people have with the DSM-5, right? Or the whatever it is that outlines mental issues, is that it's too generic, right? When you treat people too generically, you run into these problems where you don't have the ability to break down how things are going. I have a terminal illness. I'm sure my doctor could say, hey, listen, you're not such a good health state right now. When you take the vaccine, like I did, when I took the vaccine, I felt terrible for about 2 weeks on my first dose. And I felt even worse, but for a shorter period of time on my second dose. And when I got my booster, I felt pretty bad for about 2 days. Now, that affected my breathing, which also affects my terminal illness. My terminal illness is breathing related. If my doctor hypothetically said, you shouldn't take this right now because it can negatively affect your breathing, it can negatively affect all these other things, and I'm concerned that you're going to spiral, right? That this is going to lead you into a spiral. Maybe I might be right on that scope where the federal government is going to say, hey, this mandate's here. This is not enough reason for you because technically on paper you seem fine. This is really your doctor having a precaution. That kind of runs into a thing where it's, this is not, I have other options if I get COVID, right? I have other options now, and there's not enough relevant data. There's no refuting, right? No one is going to be able to refute the seatbelt law where it's like, hey, listen, your choice to not wear a seatbelt is yours and yours alone. That is affecting you solely. There's enough data out there for you to make an informed decision and make the perceivable correct decision, right? But COVID has only existed for 3 years now. It's 3 years.
Yeah.
Longest 3 years of my life. So I mean, we can't say that we know everything about this disease because it's only been here for 3 years.
But this is the thing, we also don't even know about the disease itself. So there's going to be side effects to the actual virus.
Exactly. And that is the point where over time we're going to be able to tell people, this is why you should get it. You have all the information now. Yes, maybe there's some side effects to these vaccines, like there are with plenty of other vaccines. I mean, the malaria vaccine, I think, was one that was an issue where we gave it to U.S. service members, and they had an active malaria issue where they scraped the scab off. I forget which one it was, but they had to get some of these vaccines when they were going over to Iraq and Afghanistan. And when you scratch the scab off, the scab was an active, like if you tested it, it would come back as being active for whatever they had gotten vaccinated for, right? So there's these issues that come into play that I think are relevant that they didn't know when they were giving these vaccines. And they were kind of like, hey, this would have been nice to know if we were told. This might have affected me joining up.
But no one's giving a vaccine as like as a malicious thing. It's usually done with the idea of protecting yourself and protecting others.
Are
Go
we
ahead.
sure of that? Because I don't know. I've seen some of Fauci's emails, and it's a little
Oh,
scandalous.
what do you say?
No, it's a joke. I do think it is important for us to talk about, right? That in this scope, the issue of vaccines right now is a booming business. And that's another thing that also gets me questioning, right? Like car manufacturers fought the seatbelt law, right? They fought when Reagan was in office, President Ronald Reagan lowered the speed limit from, I think it was 65, the national speed limit, to 55, right? And that's why we have to travel 55 miles an hour on roads. Now, that was partially because the goal of lowering deaths due to accidents. But the other thing is there was no decent seatbelt. Volvo comes out, they develop the first seatbelt, they don't patent it, they release it to everybody. Everybody adopts it pretty uniformly, right? Now, before that, there were some companies where like we're putting all this money into R&D to develop this. It's going to cost us a lot. We're going to fight this a little bit in Congress. We're going to come after this. We don't want to have to do this. And eventually it rolled over as big business does. But we also have to take into account that big business is always going to fight some things unless there's money to be made. And we cannot deny the fact that right now we have had 2 vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson too, so 3, even though one's not on the market anymore, that have been rolled out at a seismic rate that has never occurred before to an amount of people. There's how many millions
the
of people?
research on these
Hold on.
vaccines has been in the development for years. The COVID-19 is a type of coronavirus that they've had. That's the reason why they were able to get the vaccine so fast.
But it's never been used on people. This is one of the first few times. The thing too that we have to keep in mind, right, is even when you do a test group, there are going to be some effects that you're not going to be able to predict. That's why when you see all those, when you see all those drug commercials on TV, they may list 1,000 side effects, and there may only be 2 people who have ever gotten those side effects, but those drugs have been tested for years, right? And then the other thing too is all these companies are getting emergency authorization and federal funding, right, to roll out these vaccines kind of reasonably, but we would be too naive to say, hey, listen, they've got something to gain by letting this go and being the only game in town.
But then also, let's look at it from this perspective. Let's say everyone had this type of mindset when it came down to something like smallpox, right? I don't think we would have eradicated smallpox by the 1980s.
I think we would have been realistic about smallpox.
I think we would still be having smallpox to this day, and it would be an issue. Well, I think the same thing with the flu. We still have the flu. We have flu shots every single year. It's not mandated, but we have the availability for it. But I think if we
the difference
the
between
only
the flu,
reason why
there's different variants of the flu, and we don't always target the variants of the flu correctly.
Sure.
Sometimes we're wrong.
Yeah. So the only reason why this issue with the COVID-19 vaccine in particular has become this big was just because it became politicized.
I'm not sure that's 100% correct either, because smallpox, right? If you look at it, there wasn't this much money necessarily being pumped into smallpox.
Let's look at the economies at the time, though.
I don't think it's going to match. I mean, here we could try to find a stat, right?
And did smallpox shut down the whole world? Did everyone have to stay inside? And
smallpox was in a huge, I forget, the influenza virus was one that caused a huge shutdown during the mobilization during World War I. But smallpox has also been largely accepted because it's been around for so long as this is just a thing that happens, right? Which is eventually what COVID will most likely be. But let's see how much money. I don't know if it's going to tell me because I tried to see how many people. Alrighty, so let's see. HHS funds U.S.-based production of smallpox. I don't know if this is going to tell me the year. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services will provide approximately $11 million to support the U.S.-based fill and finish manufacturings of a vaccine that I can't pronounce to prevent smallpox and monkeypox. A Grand River Aseptic Manufacturing. I think that's recent. That's 2022. So I don't think this is.
Thing. I think now because of the monkeypox outbreak, you're probably going to get like any type of search, you're probably gonna have to like do like really extensive search to find out.
Yeah, the problem is this is coming up
Yeah.
with so many bioterror issues. Let's see here. I don't know if we're going to be able to find a statistic. If you find a statistic and you're watching, please feel free to send it to us. All right, let's see.
Shout out to Edward Jenner.
Some people's going to be joining right now and they'd be like, why is it dead air right now? What? You guys are said to be hotheads.
I think this was the most we've argued so far.
How much money was spent on smallpox blankets? That's not a good thing on there. That's weaponizing smallpox in the USSR. That's not a good thing. $2 billion on emergent smallpox vaccines 2019.
Also, I honestly don't think we're gonna find the statistic of how much money was put into it, but
so it says around 977 million people were estimated to live in the endemic areas. To vaccinate them was roughly 10 cents per person, a total of $98 million. Now, I don't know if that's that's cgdeg.org. Let's see. Oh, this is a PDF. I don't like opening PDFs because I can't get who did this, and it doesn't offer geographic area worldwide. In 1966, there was approximately 10 million and 15 million cases of smallpox in more than 50 countries, and 1.5 million to 2 million people died from the disease each year. So this is not too far off, right? The annual cost effectiveness for campaigns between 1967 and 1979 was 23 million. In total, international donors provided 98 million, and with 200 million came with the endemic countries. The United States saves the total for all of its contributions every 26 days because it does not have a vaccine to treat the disease. Let's see. So a good number that we're going off of, it's going to be 200 million to treat the world, right? This is what they're using for the world. 23 million. Let's see here.
You said 20, and that's taking into consideration inflation and everything?
Well, no, this is just a study that it looks like. I think it's focused on smallpox globally with a concentrated area in Somalia. So like the impact in Somalia between 67 and 79.
So that's just.
So this is 200 million between that. I guess it's like a 13-year period, and that's globally. So it's $200 million globally over the course of 13 years.
But just for one place?
No. It's the annual cost of the smallpox campaign.
Okay.
So 200 million came from the endemic. They're also, I don't know if that's including what the donors provided. There's 3 different numbers here. I'm a little confused on how it is. And that's just in the presentation, right? So let's see here. Alrighty. Here we go. This is a good statistic from 2021 about how much the U.S. government has put into COVID-19 vaccine distributions. This is by healthaffairs.org. It just had the number. Yeah, so it looks like it's substantially larger. I have 18 billion and 23 billion, it looks like, is what Congress placed. Most recently, the Congressional Budget Office estimated that Biomedical Research and Development Authority, BARDA, alone has spent $19.3 billion on COVID-19 vaccine development. In addition, there has been the Lisa Cornish Project has spent $39.5 billion in U.S. spending. Now, I believe that's a pretty substantial number in comparison. I think even with if we were to like factor in like how much money has kind of fluctuated, I don't think you can take 200 million and turn it into even 19.3 billion, right? I think that's a lot more money that we're spending on US vaccines. Even the 13 years time span, and then on top of that, it's another 20 years or something like that.
With smallpox, is it a one-time vaccine or is it
That's a good question. Let me see.
Because then that would also take into account, because with COVID, we've had 2 vaccines and plus a booster. And some people have gotten their fourth.
Let's see. Smallpox vaccinations provide full immunity for 3 to 5 years and decreasing immunity afterwards. So it's one vaccine for 3 to 5 years, but there is a chance that you could have to get a booster after your 3 to 5 years.
However, how many people actually get that? Probably
Let's
not
see
much.
here. The
I'm pretty
vaccine has
sure-
been effective in preventing smallpox in 95% of those vaccinated. That's health.newyork.gov. Right. So let me see here. But we're also talking about 10 cents. How much does the COVID vaccine cost
that's
per
true.
person? Let's see here. Approximately $40 to administer. Yeah, but this is like without insurance and stuff like that. $40 to administer each dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, including the additional doses and booster doses. Okay. I think the other relevant thing that's important is the smallpox vaccine has been around longer than COVID-19 vaccine has, because I mean, even in 1885, Massachusetts institutes their first requirement of a vaccine, and it's smallpox.
1855, yeah.
Right. And I mean, 1855 to basically 1985, that's 100 years that it's been around. I think even with the COVID vaccine being around in some way to treat monkeypox, right, which was its main goal, and other bat coronaviruses, or it wasn't monkeypox, it was bat coronaviruses before that. I mean, that's still not 100 years that it's been around being, developed and seen to some use.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that there's more money if you want to really make some money here.
So what was your point on the money then?
I think it's reasonable for some people to look at that as a relevant topic of discussion, that some of this money is getting made, and to then limit people, right? So a government enforced limitation on someone who may not want to get a vaccine, because especially right now in time where we have other treatment options, it doesn't seem good, right? From the perspective of a government institution mandating that you have to get when you have other things, when there's so much money at play. And as we both know, these institutions have a lot of money to throw around, and they're only going to gain, right? So I think that is a relevant statement to make, where you might, I don't think it's right to then mandate a vaccine because a corporation is lobbying a large portion of the government to require or force some form of vaccine mandate, because they know they're going to make out in the end too, right? That kind of leads me to where, it's not even just about saving people's health and wellness. There's a corporation trying to make money off of it. And that just seems, no matter what you like slate across the board, right, of how well established the system or the rules should be, that seems wrong, right? If we're having rules and mandate, right? Volvo did not patent the seatbelt.
Yeah, that's true.
And I mean, it seems like it would be nice for me to come out here and say, yes, everyone, should get vaccinated, which maybe it should be more required, or maybe, it might be nice, but I can't necessarily say that, because I don't trust the institution that would be mandating it. Part of this comes back to institutional, trust. If you can't trust the institution, what business does the institution have in mandating something? If you can look at an institution and say, there's a lot of holes in this ship, I don't want to get on it, I think you might be speaking because the company that you used to work for before you became, the head of whatever health organization, right, might be saying, hey, listen, when you are done, when you decide, in 2 years, I'm done with government life, you can come back here, come join our board, right? Not unheard of, and if you force this along, we'll make sure that we give you a nice golden parachute later. We'll make sure that we give you a nice paycheck later. And to me, as somebody looking out, it seems like it would be ridiculous to place a mandate on someone, because that could be a force. That could be a force that's being put forward, right? They have to do this because this guy's going to make out, and who really cares about the other parts?
So then what are your thoughts on then the people that aren't vaccinated then wearing masks?
I think mask mandates are something that institutions can ask for and mandate. I don't think that's unreasonable, right?
Really?
I don't think it's unreasonable because I
Why?
agree with the Supreme Court's decision, right? Your rights do have an ending zone, and that's where someone else steps in, right? That's where ownership steps in. If I own a business, right, and that business is, say, a deli, and you're entering into my deli, we're agreeing to an exchange of goods and services, right, for a price. But I have a right to set the price of my goods and services, right, unless it's like an exorbitant amount and I'm the only game in town and that's a monopoly. But I also have a right to request that you treat my institution with a certain degree of respect, right? That means I can kick you out if you're being rude to my employees in a way that's not reasonable, right?
Mhm.
Where if you're just, belittling the people who work for me, I can say, could you please leave? Or if I have determined that within this store, within this institution, I believe you should have a mask on, right? I can ask you, put a mask on, please. And when you say, no, I will not, it's my right, it's my constitutional right to not put a mask on. That's fine. You may go and conduct your constitutional rights off of my private property.
But let's say it's public property.
That's where I don't know. And that's where it gets difficult because I'm not sure if I want people to be denied the use of public property. But yet again, I mean, it does come into the issue that, they can require that you not do certain things on public property, right? Like, you can't just storm into a congressman's office or the Capitol building either for that matter. Although that,
But let's say it's a public school.
public schools come in a different degree because it's kids. I mean, I'm sorry. The law is just going to get, I mean, when you're talking about kids, it doesn't really matter. If you have no business to be in a school, you probably shouldn't be there. That runs into a whole
But
host
let's
of
say it is
other.
kids, right? So now we're against
Is it
mandating a vaccine for them.
kids?
We're
Is it
against
kids going into the public
kids
school?
going into schools. We're against giving them.
That's where it gets difficult because the whole kids the school. I don't want to say kids choice. This isn't Nickelodeon. The whole degree, right, where it's like how much authority do kids have over their own body gets really difficult here.
Well, typically when it comes to medical decisions, it's
Yeah,
usually the parent's decision.
but that's where it gets concerning, right? Because I want to look at it and I say, well, if someone is incurring an unwanted pregnancy and they're 14 or 15 years old, and if they go to mom and dad, they're going to get ostracized and they're not ready to take care of this kid. I want to look around and I say, that 14 or 15-year-old kid is probably making a mentally stable decision on their own well-being. If you're 14 and 15 years old and you're put in that position, it's a tough position to be in, and no person is going to come to a decision just, with little understanding of it, right? They might not fully grasp, I don't want to say the consequences because that's not a good word, but they might not understanding the future outcome of what it means, and they haven't been there before, so they're not going to fully get the scope of it. But I think I'm going to give 14 and 15-year-olds credit to make their own decisions in some way. And if I have to make it on, a 14 and 15-year-old should be able to, make a decision that they're not going to follow through with a pregnancy. They're not going to continue to do this. Then I should also be able to make it that they have a right to not wear a mask in an institution. The
most important question, helmets.
Okay. First of all, if you're riding a motorcycle, I respect you. But if you're riding a motorcycle and don't have a helmet on, you're a crazy person. Okay. I've never ridden a motorcycle as much as I would love to. I haven't had the chance to. Please wear a helmet. Please wear a helmet. Right? Like, I mean, seatbelts are one thing.
But why?
Because when you get hit by a driver who doesn't know what they're doing, but here's the thing, that driver is still at fault. And you not wearing it, the accident is not your fault. It's that driver who didn't know what they were doing.
Let's say the accident was your fault and you're the one. Just using your argument, right?
If the accident is your fault, then you should have don't get into an accident.
Then it's you should have known better. So
you
how can we tell?
Known better.
Yeah. So if you should have known better, then how can we specifically? I don't know. I'm just saying. Final thoughts on.
What's your final thoughts?
My final thought is my thoughts haven't changed. I still think that a person has the right to what's happening to their body until and when we start to get into what can affect global health governance.
Global
Global
governance.
health.
Global
Global
health. You think so it's a global issue. You wouldn't say it's a local issue.
Well, it is also a local issue, but I feel like if I phrased it any other way, then people can then put the argument that, well, the fetus is human and you're technically impacting that life, so that's the best
I
way
think
to
when
put
it comes into that, it gets into so much murky water.
Mhm.
But I think a broad spectrum approach is probably best of just listen. If you have the data to make an informed decision, please make an informed decision. You know what is the right decision to make. But when you choose not to, you have to live with the consequences that come with that decision, right? You have to be willing to. It can't be, oh, I didn't know. You did know, right? Like if people get COVID and they start, you can't look at somebody like, I'm not gonna, as a person, if you get COVID and it starts to go bad because you didn't have a vaccine, I'm not gonna look at you and be like, oh, poor that person. I'll be like, should have gotten vaccinated. There's enough information out there. But also the same point, I can also understand if there's someone who is at no expressed risk, who is aware of what they're doing, who is taking the proper precautions. And the same goes for the guy who's riding the motorcycle. He knows he should be wearing a helmet. But I'm not going to say that the government should force that on him because at the same point, the guy's going to do what he's going to do with or without you there, right? I mean, this is his life he's talking about. It's not really anybody else's, right? I mean, if kids should have to ride in car seats. No one's arguing that kids shouldn't have to ride in car seats. They're not able to make that decision. And if you are the parent of those kids, you have to make the correct decision for them.
So when can we start making our own decisions? Are we saying at 18?
18. I think it should be 18. It's a hard number.
But we can drive a car at 16?
Well, you can drive a car at 16, but driving a car at 16 doesn't mean you're making your own decisions. It means you're driving a car.
Yeah, but they can be held.
You gotta give them a grace period to start figuring the world out.
Oh, really?
Where it's like they can be held to punishment at a different degree, but it's, that's where it comes into a different degree.
Okay. Well, that's the end of the episode.
Teodora is very upset now.
I'm not upset. Who said I was upset? I was just saying I was just really excited because we finished on the dot.
We did finish on the dot.
That was
high five.
That was that. Next week we're not going to tell you the topic for next week. We'll leave it up to the imagination.
It's a fancy way of us saying we have a lot of work to do next week, and we don't think we want to go with the other topic right now because it's gonna a lot of work.
Anyways, but in 2 weeks, let me tell you, that topic is gonna go crazy.
Oh, that'll be
very
lively in the booth.
We will be arguing. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.